Alright, so I made a couple of changes. Let's go over them. Okay, so I went back and looked at the episode 9 or session 9 video in order to remember how the polymorphic embeds library worked. And the idea is that I want to be able to save an entity with some default components. So that's what I want to work on today. In support of this, I created a component vector3, which has an x, y, and z. And in the spaces component, I commented out the stuff with parent and child. I think maybe that's overkill to try to create a tree for persistence. It's enough to just save the parent ID for now. We have a create component for an entity where you pass in the entity ID, the component type, which can be position, for example, and then that type is passed in as underscore underscore type underscore underscore inside the map of attributes. This would be where x, y, and z is. And we're also saving the type up on its own column so that we could query all of the components of the same name, for example, position or rotation. What else? We changed the entity belongs to. We added a type to the polymorphic embed, which is position, which is a type of vector3. And we kind of changed the change set so that we can save a component that belongs to an entity. We added a has many components for the entity and commented out the stuff about child count and children. We'll remove that later. And we started on some testing, so we added a component fixture which will create its entity if entity ID is not in the attributes, and then it will use the create component for entity. Then we commented all this stuff out about spaces because we wanted to narrow down on our feature. And in fact, I think it's probably this context is a bit big. So two things I want to do now, I think that was it, right? Yeah, the rest is test, is split these out into their own contexts. And let's also get the ability to create an entity with some default components. So let's add that to our to-do right now. So we want to, one, create a box with position, rotation, and scale. And two, we want to split entity and component into context. Or what it's a context of isn't the live space, it's kind of the, how do you say, it's the staging or environment. Anyway, let's concentrate on that. Okay, so where is a box being created? A box is being created under the spaces create entity. So let's see. Spaces, here's this context. So we have this. I mean, I guess the context is still okay. It is part of spaces, but maybe it doesn't need to be part of this. Okay, I mean, we can always move these things around. Let's say we want to create entity. So let's look up that create entity. All right. it takes a couple of things here, and then we insert it. So what kind of entity could it be? We should validate the type of entities it is. So let's take a look at the entity change set. Yes, here we were inspecting the attributes, and we were allowing name, type, the space ID, and a potential parent ID. The only one that's required is the type. I think we're going to want a name at least too, right? And create name if missing. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So this is the entity, and we have kind. So we should maybe validate that the type is required. And okay, so here's my question. Can you do cast association, any kind of components with the XR components? We need a function here. So components change set. Taking in what, 2 parameters or something? Yeah, it takes 2 parameters. Whoops. Like this. /2. Cast association. Or is it build association? Let's see, ecto cast association. Oh, with. Gotcha. Cast component with and ampersand. Yeah, that seems right. Components change sets undefined. Oh, component. Oh, the XR spaces. Okay. It's not required. And okay, let's give it a test. So if we go through the spaces test, describe. Okay, so here we have an entity. Yes, we can create a component directly for that, but can you just do... Okay, so I don't want to use this. I want to do spaces, create entity, and here are my attributes. So here I should get back an entity, and we can give it the type, which is a box. The name will automatically get created. I think before, Oh, I needed a space though, so space equal space fixture, and I think you can give the space ID is space and pipe this into IO inspect. Okay, so what do we got here? We get back okay. So we see spaces entity, components not loaded, ID, insert at name, parent ID, space ID, type is box. Great. And what if we want to preload? Repo dot preload the components. No function clause. The following preload. Oh, okay. So this gives you okay an entity. We need to say entity equal entity, and let's try that. We have here. Okay, empty list here. So in the create entity, what if we were to pass, oh yes, in the test, let's add a couple more things. What if we added components, which is a list, and each one is a map, and each one has a type. Let's say this one is position, and it has data. And data says that, oh, I don't think I have to send all that. I think I can just send, now what do I need to send? The API that I want is I want to just send type and data. So I want to say the type is position, and I want to say the data is X, Y, and Z. Okay, so what happens is it will go through the create entity, unexpected token, it's 78. could not infer polymorphic embed from this. Okay. Get data and the type. Okay. So we go back to the change set for the component. Goes through here. So we're getting this, and data is what? Data is just a map. Okay, so we wanna pre-process data a little bit. So let's say adders. Assuming the happy path. So let's say the adders type. And let's say the data is adders data. And we can say that adders equal map dot merge adders from before, and so type can stay what it is, but data needs to be data. Actually, let's do this. Map dot merge adders data and our map put. The key you want is type with type. Put that in, and I think you're fine. Then just say that map dot put back into adders data key with the new data. So that is adders. So then you cast this, and what does this do? Now you can infer it. So what do we get? We get entity with components, and we have a position. And if we wanted to test that, you could also have rotation. We'll just send that along as well. So copy and paste this. This can be rotation. So we save that. And now we get two components. One is position, the next is rotation. The values are there. Okay, this is a good place to pause. So what we have now is the test that says we can create an entity that's a type of box, belongs to this space, and it has these components. But can we automatically create these components, or at least default, which is at the origin with no rotation and no scaling, just by specifying box? And then we ensure that when we preload this, that we have three components. So we could say assert entity dot components that the length equal 3. Right now it'll fail because it'll say it has 2. Yep, left side 2, right side 3. Okay, so we want it so that we don't have to specify any of these components, but it's glad to know that this works. as a happy path. So if we do this, now in our spaces create entity, I think we could do some pre-processing here. We could say that we could say build default components from adders type, and this gives us a new adders. And maybe we make this part of entity, so entity. So let's go to the entity module. And in here we'll have a type. So the type is adders type. Or maybe we can do this. This is adders, but we also destructure the type. And any other kind, anything else, we could raise type required. Okay. In here, we will look up maybe we just have a lookup table, default components. It could be this way for now. Which can just be, maybe it's a map. It can be position, and this can be the data that's in there. X 0, Y 0, Z 0, position, and let's just copy this for rotation and scale. Bam, bam. Rotation, scale. So those are the default components of just about anything. Maybe this can be the catch-all. Anyway, this will work for a box at least. So build default components. So with the type, you say call it get or fetch. I think we're fine. You say default components equal default components passing in the type. Then what happens? Then for each one, so you can map over everyone, actually you could just copy their data into the map. No, you can't. You've got to do a little bit of processing. So you need to do enum.map over default components, which would give you a function. What happens when you enum over a map? So if this is a thing, IEX, so if map is this, enum dot map over that function, is there like a key value tuple inspect key? Key is there. I inspect, or how about key and value? Right. I'll inspect the value then. Okay, I think that's right. So we say we get a tuple of key and value, and what we want to return is a new map that has the type equal to the key and data equal to the value. Or map dot put into the value the type, which is the key. Alright, so that'll build default components under components, and you should do map dot put into the adders components. So that'll look up the defaults from here and put them in. And if we don't care what this is for right now, then any default component you look up will produce these things. Okay, so we have a change set. But we'll look them up from the spaces. Okay, so we get build default components. With that, we get the adders. I think that's all we have to do. Quit this, run our test. Okay, type is required. Type is required for where? Saving components on entity. Go back to entity. I inspect adders. Was there no type in here? Oh, build default components needs the whole thing, not just that. A map. So build default components requires a map with a type key. Go back to spaces. Spaces. Yes, just pass in adders. And we didn't do anything with the result. Okay. We got our entity and the components are position 0, 0, rotation 0, 0, 0, scale 1, 1, 1. This is test. Okay, so we can do that with a box. We can do that with... Okay, so that part is satisfied. Now, do we want to split the entity and component into their own context? Maybe. What do we have now? We have a pretty giant context here for spaces. Component, entity, get rid of plugin. We got space and template. This has to do with defining a space, and later we'll have stuff that is more about the runtime. So these might have more to do with the scene. Okay, let's save our work here and come back to this question later. But for right now, if we... Does this work in the UI? Let's see. ix-x mix. First, reset our database. So, oh no, those were in test. ix-x mix Phoenix server. Cannot see this text at all. And let's go enter and menu. Add a box. And it breaks. What happened here? So it looks like this happened. Okay, so we're getting symbolized keys instead of string keys. So what happens when we click that add? Okay. that has to do with the live view space edit handle event add entity. Okay, the adder is here. We can just do this. Oh, got it. And if we look at this box, we can do repo.all entity. Of course, we don't have entity. Let's add that to our here. Spaces, component. Oh, yes. Okay. So this will be entity and entity preload components. Nice. Kind of position our rotation. In each case, the data is just a vector 3, so it doesn't know what it is. So this is really important. Cool. Okay, so that works now. Let's save this work. Ability to create a box with default components of position, rotation, scale. All right, we'll stop right here.